Everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Anders Lillevik, founder and CEO of Focal Point, a company providing an end-to-end enterprise procurement orchestration platform. Anders, thank you so much for joining the show. I'm really excited to learn about your background, your process in building, and also what procurement means and what it means for companies, kind of broadly speaking, but also, where are the pitfalls in that companies fall into, when they think about this whole procurement process. But before we get into all that, what were you doing before you started Focal Point?
Well, Julian, thanks a lot for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I started the company, I did the normal, route, climbing the career ladder. So I got my MBA, started in procurement, in the financial services sector, and I worked my way up. So for the last 15 years, I've been running large global procurement organizations. Some of the companies that you might know are companies like Fannie Mae, Webster Bank, Citizens Bank, and QBE Insurance. So I've managed teams from 25 to 120 and managed corporate spend up to $12 billion per annum. And that's really, the jumping off point before I started Focal Point.
Amazing. And describe procurement for those who don't know in the audience.
Sure. So procurement is the acquisition of goods and services that a company uses to run their operations. So for example, every company buys things to run the company. So I'm sitting in a hotel right now. They acquire linens and sheets and beverages and TVs to go on the wall and cleaning services and all those things. Those things have gone through procurement. And really expanding beyond that, once you have a vendor selected, you have to get a contract in place. You have to manage that provider. You have to manage the services and the risks and so on. And that's really the remit of procurement, to make sure that you are buying the goods and services your company need at an affordable price, but also while managing the risk and delivery of the services that you need.
Yeah. Is procurement something that you've always been excited about? Is it something that you fell into? What was the journey into procurement? Because it's not I would say a traditional career path. If we think about people going to investment banking, sales, or engineering, there's something very hyper focused, I feel, in an operational capacity.
Certainly. So I took my MBA as a co-op student, meaning you did 4 months of school, 4 months of work, and so on. And my first placement was in a procurement organization at a large bank in Canada. They needed an analyst to build a SQL Server database to house all of their transaction data. And that happened to be in procurement. So I knew SQL, I knew QMeth. And so I got hired in to do that. And within 2 months, they were like, yeah, so would you like to stay on and run this thing for us? And the rest, as I say, was history. So I stayed in procurement and they paid for my MBA. I mean, it was a rough 3.5 years doing it part-time, but paid the bills and I learned a lot of stuff along the way. So it was completely by accident.
Incredible. So just to understand it a little bit more of the structure, is procurement, you said you were part of a procurement organization within a larger bank. Is that how most enterprise companies, once to get to a certain scale, they have a whole kind of team or individual who oversees, the procurement process?
Yeah, that's correct. So at the end of the day, right, you need a certain amount of scale before you just have to say, all right, I need someone to manage this day to day.
Yeah.
So procurement expense is typically only second to HR expense. And sometimes in this day and age, procurement expense actually is larger than HR expense. For instance, Apple, to my knowledge, outsources a ton of their manufacturing to a third-party manufacturer or multiple. And again, someone has to manage all of those suppliers to make sure that the stuff, the parts and components gets delivered to those manufacturing sites and to be assembled there. And I dare say, I do not know this for a fact, but some of these manufacturing companies that outsource manufacturing, the third-party expense probably dwarfs their HR expense, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Typically what I see is companies that have more than $50 to $100 million in purchase expense can benefit significantly from having somebody in procurement to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, going back to, I feel like when companies think about their expenses, I think we think of it in a negative light, like, oh, I'm spending money on these things, I'm allocating resources. But what are the benefits to companies, purchasing different, or having different operational costs for whether it's enabling team members or whether it's like you mentioned within a hotel room, offering some level of goods and services. What are the benefits that companies have with, purchasing other things so that they can have, whether it's a full service product or, or whether their team's enabled to do more efficiently and better work?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you can do with procurement, if you're buying a capability that you otherwise would have to build in house. So,
Yeah.
for example, we all have the management consulting example where I need to know something or I need to build something real quick, and you hire experts in the field that can sort of
Yeah.
bring you up to speed. And it's the same with procurement, right? So, um, you really can, uh, leapfrog the capability process by getting experts to do it that really specialize in something. And, it's so obvious, but people don't think about it very often.
Yeah. Yeah. What's typical like procurement acquisition process? So I'm reviewing a few different tools. I'm looking at purchasing it. Who's the buyer? Who's the overall? Who approved the purchase? What does that process typically look at an enterprise company?
So it really depends on what you're requiring, right? So if you're requiring something that is, let's call it, um, commoditized, that doesn't actually have information or processing or risk, it's usually just quick, put it on your credit card or P card and get it done fast and furious. But then as you get up the curve of saying, all right, these suppliers are going to manage tons of information of my company and my customers, or they're going to manage the customer facing process, or you can add a little more, or they are in, they're operating in a low cost country with different regulations. All of a sudden, the due diligence requirements become onerous.
Yeah.
And typically, at the highest level, you start off with a set of requirements. So what is it that you need this thing or service to do? To sort of like, I need a computer, I need it to be this fast, I need it to have these functions to manage this load. And then you can sort of say, all right, now I have the requirements. Now I can see who in the marketplace can actually meet those goods or services. Find a short list of suppliers that you want to send it to based on research that you do. And then you can send those requirements out to the suppliers and say, all right, please give me a proposal for how you want to fulfill these things.
Yeah.
And once you get your responses back, then you can validate to say, all right, do they have the right requirements? Do they have the right, security posture? Do they have legal terms and conditions that are acceptable to us? And so on and so forth. So it's a long drawn out process that requires a lot of collaboration internally. And this part of the reason why I started the company is that it's a very complex process. Once you get to these very different, very complex buys, and it requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of data collected from different sources and so on. And as you're starting to layer on additional regulatory requirements. So for example, can we acquire these goods and services from a company from a diverse background, the ownership background? So, so that there's a data source for that. Do I pick a low emissions provider or somebody who's less wasteful provider? And all of a sudden, like what used to be, all right, let's just get the lowest cost to be like lowest cost, the lowest risk, and all these other criteria, and it becomes very complex. So I know you asked me a very simple question, like what is typically the process? The process depends a lot on the maturity of the organization and what other things they have going on. I work for companies that didn't have much in the way of diversity or social, social responsibility stuff. But then you have some companies who don't care about saving money because they're so flush with cash and they just want the process to go fast. So like, it really depends on the environment you're in. And I can't name names, but you could probably think of them.
What are some of the, I don't know if it's silos or I don't know if it's bottlenecks, but where are some of the issues with the procurement process? Anything that I feel that it has a lot of collaboration. There are certain blocks, certain barriers or bumps in the road that delay the process and acquiring some tool or service or good. Where are those? Are they common? Are they very unique to the particular company? Where have you seen, I guess, the problems in procurement today?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is for procurement in particular is that they are the custodians of multiple processes that they don't control. So as you know, as you come to me and say, I need to buy something, I need a service from someone. All right. So we can talk, we can bang out the requirements, we can go to market, and we can decide who we want to invite, all those things. Once the thing comes back, then all of a sudden you have to involve legal, information security, risk and compliance, and so on. And these people are not service oriented. They are risk mitigation oriented. That is their job. And they don't care how long it takes. Now, procurement manages the process to say, okay, Mr. Customer, I know you want your stuff, but it's with legal and InfoSec or security. And oftentimes procurement gets blamed for taking too long, which probably is true. But, you know, unless and until there's a certain amount of urgency on everybody's part, to make this happen as quickly and as painless as possible, that's going to be a typical reaction to procurement. Procurement is not the sexiest thing in the world, I have to admit. But, you know, hence the reason why we built the solution is the whole idea that it does take 50 plus emails to just get a simple project done. It takes 90 plus days to do a proper event.
Yeah.
It's typically, like, for the customers of procurement, it's completely a black box where they have no idea where things are. And quite honestly, that is a mistake for procurement. They really need to open up the box to show what's going on. And then, you know, information breeds awareness, right?
Yeah. Where along your journey, you're working with other larger companies to manage their procurement process, and sure, you're doing a lot of different, you know, tasks with them, analytics, and also maybe, you know, consulting and decision making. What was the inspiration to really dive into and build a product that lubricates this process and makes it more efficient, more effective, and more visible?
You know, it's funny. So I was having a cold beverage with a peer of mine one day, and he's another Chief Procurement Officer for a large manufacturing company based in Florida. And he had just gone through a long selection process, and he was buying a procurement system. He was taking out the old stuff and ripping and putting in a new one, best of class. He was very happy. Life was good. And over this cold beverage, he goes, Anders, I'm so glad I did this. Now I'm going to finally get rid of Excel. And I looked him in the eye and I said, tell me more. Well, you know, now the system is going to be here. It's going to be great. Everything's going to be on system. You don't no longer have to do any of this stuff. I'm like, not quite. I said, you still have to manage all your project loads, all the workflow sign-offs, you know, all the collaboration, all that stuff gets done offline. That's not going to be managed in the tool. And he got beat red in the face. He looked me in the eye and says, are you telling me I'm going to spend $1.6 million a year on the system and manage all my SHIT in Excel? I'm like, yeah, man, I'm sorry. I had exactly the same epiphany when I did it. And he lost his mind. Not just, I mean, he believed that this was going to solve all his problems. That's what he sold to his executives. And obviously he came to realize that wasn't going to be the case. And that was a penny drop moment for me. Like, yeah, why is it like this? Like, we have all these APIs, we have all these systems, we have all these chat boxes, like we have all the solutions and disparate things. Let's bring them all together to make a solution where you can get access all the data in one spot, access all your stakeholders in one spot, move work in and out of departments without having to send emails that then become lost in the ether. Let's give a window into the procurement process for users and stakeholders so they can see where everything is. And, you know, henceforth the reason that I started the company.
Incredible. It's fascinating how many stories, you know, you hear with founders discussing, you know, having conversation around a recent acquisition of a tool, but then there's always some limitation to it or some feature that's missing to really encompass the overall solution. And so my question is, how have you know, what are you focusing on? What are the solutions before that really, you know, missed in terms of whether it's a feature or whether it's not having the collaboration tools? You know, what's involved in the Focal Point platform that, you know, is different from its predecessors?
Sure. So if you acquire a procurement system today, or systems as it were, you're acquiring a bunch of vertically focused tools. You will have a solution that manages contracts, a solution that manages the RFP process, a solution that manages purchase order transmission, and one that manages an invoice and so on. But hardly any of the solution, if any of them, focuses on the information layer that all of that stuff is built on and allow you to use those artifacts as part of other processes. So I will give you the example we just talked about, right? So before you send out that RFP, there's a ton of work that gets done. Like I said, you have to get your requirements vetted. You have to figure out who internally should participate, which suppliers to invite, the riskiness of like all the stuff has to be done before you can actually get to do something in procurement. And all that stuff is done off system, right? It's in somebody's share drive or an email inbox or a bunch of, documents in Office 360, right? And so that was really the reason why I started the company is that I was used to operating like that and we had to find a better way. Yeah. So what we're focused on is the primary thing is taking all the data that's just into disparate systems and creating a data lake or a layer of data that can be sort of drawn on. So if you want to know what is the risk profile of, these top 10 suppliers, like you take the risk data with the supplier data, with the spend data and so on, you can sort of say, all right, here it is. All right, what do I do with that? Well, let's see if we can mitigate some risk. And then you create a project up and then you collaborate on the project from beginning to end. So the whole idea of having all this data and then create artifacts and workflows using that data across the process from beginning to end is really what we are building right now.
What are the challenges building? Oh yeah. What are the No. Wait. What are the challenges building something that is kind of a data lake that you have to extract, information from versus something that communicates vertically?
Well, I mean, the good thing and the bad thing about data, it comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes, right? So we love these large enterprise spend tools because the data comes fairly structured and we can take data that has a lot of structure to it and really scale that up. But then you have to realize also there are other data sources out there that we have to link in and we do the best that we can. And we are trying to acquire a lot of capabilities by using best-in-class tools that are in the cloud, like the Azure cloud and AWS cloud, to be able to again scale faster than we otherwise would have if we built them ourselves.
Yeah, it makes sense. Kind of the different tools you're gonna have to incorporate and build upon. I'm sure there's just a lot of plugins, APIs, and then a layer of data that's taken in terms of analytics that you pull from there. How's it being on the other side of the procurement process now? Being that you're I guess a customer, looking to be purchased from or a supplier. How would you categorize yourself now in the procurement process, and how is it being on the other side?
It sucks. Being on the other side is different for sure, right? But I kind of get it because I've been on the other side of that. So, for instance, we just did a deal recently with a large pharmaceutical company. And by the time the contract was negotiated and baked and we gone through all the security processes, like it had been months and months and months. And they were like, all right, it's going to take 3 weeks for the contract to be signed. I'm like, how is that possible? And then I realized, oh yeah, I know why. There's probably some long drawn out process that requires 85 people with hats and ropes and cloaks and because I was there. And so you kind of like, all right, this is the reason why we're here. Like, so that the next people don't have to do it and it doesn't have to take that long. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. So it's kind of profound at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're taking all the heat up front for everyone else.
Let's hope so, right?
Yeah. It's so fascinating. So, having this insight and I'm always interested to chat with founders who are, almost, I would say, an expert in the field that they're building in because, they see things from a very internal lens and building from that point of view where, it's like, what would I have needed and what would have been useful if I were to have a product like that? But do you think that point of view is limiting, and how do you kind of mitigate the, having kind of the blinders on in terms of just like, okay, well, my experience was this, I'm going to build something that I would have loved to use. But, with different clients, I'm sure that there's different capabilities that you need to add and ways that you need to be a little bit more, building kind of more fitted to what they need. How do you kind of go through that process of building when you have that kind of experience?
So I try my best to be as focused as I can. The problem that we're running into is that it's such a target-rich environment. There are so many manual processes and so many disparate systems. It's kind of like boiling the ocean. And we got our two first customers pre-product. So we had our 2 letters of intent before we wrote a single line of code. and just trying to figure out what to build as sort of like the MVP or version one was challenging to me because I kept like being all over the place. Like what they were actually trying to solve was relatively simple. They wanted a solution that could keep track of projects and the savings they brought to the table. What I'm thinking, right, we need to integrate with the supplier data so they can tag suppliers to projects. We need to figure out what the spend data is so they can know what the opportunities are. And, my CTO was like, Andrew, slow down. Like the requirements, go back to requirements. Like this is what they want. Let's go build that. Like, yeah, you're right. And then, what we're trying really hard now is to design things ahead of time, knowing what's going to come. So designing is relatively cheap and relatively quick. So that when someone says, I need a system that does X, Y, and Z, we can say, oh yeah, okay, fine. Well, here's a design. It will take us X weeks to deliver this. Or we're waiting for the first client to sort of try it out with. And that typically works fairly well.
Yeah. 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 Managing the how many possibilities and capabilities you want to add versus what, someone needs right now. Is probably a huge challenge for a lot of founders. And in just keeping that focal point, no pun intended. But in regards to, you had your first two customers, with an intent. Where are you now? How many customers are you working with? What's exciting about the partnerships you've made? You mentioned you just closed a big deal with the pharmaceutical company, which I'm sure was exciting. And what are the different industries that you're focused on, or is it kind of more of the size of company?
So it's more of the size of companies and the infrastructure they have invested in. So right now, I can't really name names of customers, but we have a very large hotel chain based in Las Vegas. We have the number one job site in the country. We have some gaming companies. We have some pharma companies. We have some insurance companies. So what they all have in common is that they are large, complex, and kind of archaic in sort of how they traditionally have dealt with these things. That's a common thread. So what I will say is we haven't really done much in manufacturing yet. But I'm sure that will come. And really like what we have in common, especially with the large hotel resort company, is that they're extremely collaborative. They come to the table with great ideas. They understand that we're building something fairly special and that is groundbreaking. And they're willing to say, all right, here's my requirement. Let's wait, for two sprints before we can deliver the product. And we're like, oh, this is great. How about you do it this way instead of that way? And like, it's a push and this is a give and take sort of thing. It's been really, really great. We have fantastic customers. I just can't stress that enough. And it's much more than it's not a transactional relationship. It really is a development relationship.
Yeah. How do you go about developing that relationship from a founder perspective? Going through the whole customer acquisition funnel. It's hard to just cold, connect with someone based on the problem that they have, especially with the solution that, is like, we'll solve every problem that you've had, from the procurement process. I'm sure there's a little bit of pushback there. So what's your strategy for client acquisition?
So it's interesting. So my first arm's length customer that I acquired after, the first version was built, I basically skunk worked the sales process myself, right? Fairly scrappy. So I went on to one of these sites where I could mine data. So I pulled out Chief Procurement Officer data in every industry I could find. And then I sent a horrible email campaign. And, the title of the email campaign that I sent was Excel is not a management tool. And, the email basically described, I'm a, recovering Chief Procurement Officer. I had this idea. And I built this solution, would love to show it to you. That got me this very large resort customer. They were like, we have this problem too. Can we see it? And, a year later, we were onboarding them. I mean, that's how long the process took, right? So it's more like, I had this problem. I bet you have this problem too. But I had this problem in the finance and insurance industry. I bet you your problem is slightly different. I would love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing too is my sales team now are made up of either former procurement practitioners or folks that have sold to procurement organizations. Right. So they understand the problem and, when they need consultation, when they need someone to talk to the head of procurement or the best practices team, like they bring me in as a consultant to not as a consultant really, but as the sounding board to say like, what works, what doesn't work, what would you have done in this situation? And we have a discussion around it, right? A lot of these companies that are selling software say, well, we are best in class. You should do what we do.
Yeah.
And we don't say that, right? I kicked people out of my office when I was in business, in procurement, because certain companies said, well, this is the best in breed process because we developed it. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? It's the process you developed and you sell it. We sort of say, well, tell us what your process is so we can scale our solution to fit your process. And I think that's a much more salient way of selling rather than saying, do what we say.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face today?
The speed of the Earth's rotation, really, you always feel like you're behind. And I'm a bit of a control enthusiast, so I want to make sure things are done right. And, it's been challenging for me in particular because, having worked in companies where a budget was never, really an issue. I could say I need $1 million of extra budget because I'm going to give you this much more savings. They usually happen fairly fast. So now you have to scrimp and save to make sure that you're efficient and scrappy. You need to make sure that your delivery is done properly. So it's just a lot of learning on my part from moving from a huge organization to basically being a company of 30 people now.
Yeah.
And building up a sales, marketing, delivery, and support function from scratch, none of which I've done before. So I spent a lot of time asking my VCs for help, my advisors for help, and trying to surround myself with people who have been there and done that because I don't know what I don't know. And I know that.
I love that. Yeah. It's such a underrated strategy that I think founders know more so, but maybe early founders don't, which is lean on the people who are around you, who are supporting you, who give you money, and also people in your network and community, because, we've all gone through some kind of a similar experience, or whether challenge or growth in a certain job function that wasn't necessarily our natural, or our previous experience, but it's something that the community really shares, the compassion and empathy for. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Focal Point?
So right now we are developing a solution that does the workflow collaboration, which is great. It's a rich market, and we feel that we're addressing it better than anyone else out there. Where we're going with this now is because we have created these data repositories, and we can take any data that's tying to either a customer or a product or something like that, and we can create strategies around it and move up the value chain to sort of say, all right, the largest bank in the United States has 18 categories of spend, like management consulting or IT or whatever, which more than $1 billion per year. They're currently managing that spend using Excel and email.
What?
So imagine you have a portfolio of investments, and you're managing those 18 billion plus using Excel. It blows your mind, right?
Yeah.
And this is not an investment. This is a recurring annual expense. So we want to move into that strategy frame to say, all right, here's how you mitigate the risk. Here's how you mitigate supply chain risk. Here's how you get extracting value from it. Because what procurement tends to do is, remember the process I laid out for you earlier? Like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so the whole idea is, as contract comes up for renewal, negotiate hard, send it to RFP. But that's not always the right answer. Because if you're critically dependent on these suppliers and it takes, 2 years to switch, the pain of switching is probably not worth the hassle of extracting that money, right? So, so then tie the strategy that you deploy based on the risk criticality and the needs of the organization. So in that case scenario, long contracts, collaborate, create a relationship, right? And really help people sort of say, all right, based on the situation, here's what you should be doing with that category. That's kind of where we're going next.
Incredible. I always like to ask this question, one for selfish research, but also for my audience. Whether it was early in your career or currently now, what are some books or people who have influenced you the most?
You know what? That's an interesting question. So being an MBA student, right, I would read everything that I could, and I got to to sort of put that to work as I was working at the same time. So I'm a Jack Welch guy. I love to read all of his old stuff. Good to Great, great. I love Porter and Cotter. I think those are all great authors. But now that I'm in this space, I'm reading everything I can about how to raise money. The book I just most recently read was Gap Selling by Keenan. So I'm trying to learn things that are new to me, but my business fundamentals have all come from previous bosses, right? So if I can name names, like, I had one of my first bosses, his name was Bruce Whittington, at Bank of Montreal. He taught me everything I needed to know about procurement processes. It was great. I worked at a large investment bank in Canada, CIBC. My boss there was Molly Palekia, and she was the toughest nut I've ever met. And to this day, I still admire her tenacity. And when I worked for Webster Bank, I had a great boss named Jeff Brown. Yeah, he was like the ultimate consigliere. He made peace everywhere he went, and he was highly respected. Like, and if I can balance those three people out, I think I've done a fairly good job. So, you learn from good bosses and bad bosses, right?
Yeah.
These are the fantastic bosses I learned from.
Amazing. That's amazing to hear. And I know we're close to the end of the show here, and I so much appreciate not only your expertise in procurement and kind of shedding some light on the process and the knowledge that you have, but also I always get excited about technologies that are being built to, it's kind of disrupting, but it's really just like supporting and creating a more empowering process around something that's been either difficult or is lacking in a certain area in terms of technology and efficiency. And so always excited to hear products that are being built around that. But last little bit, where can we support Focal Point? Where can we be a part of it? If I'm an enterprise customer, where can I find you? Give us your LinkedIn's, your websites, your Twitters. Where can we be a part of the mission here?
So the easiest way to get a hold of us is at getfocalpoint.com. That's our website, and there's also our handle on LinkedIn. You can reach me at Lillevik. That's my handle on LinkedIn as well. You can always email me directly at anders@getfocalpoint.com. Always excited to talk to prospects, enterprises, potential investors, and people I can help. I love helping people because I believe in karma big time.
Of that. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited to share this with my audience, and I hope you enjoyed yourself as well.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah.